one of the things that I think transition, in the interim period between 8, 9, and 10, and then after 10, as far as Final Fantasy is concerned, and this is what I'm referencing when I'm referring to this set of numbers, the Final Fantasy franchise, which so much of these former videos have been about, but, 8 got made fun of, I remember at the time, because like Love was, they had been doing this in their marketing, talking about what some of the major themes and the storylines were, and very often it was like life and death and other kinds of themes. But one of the big themes with 8 was love, and people made fun of that like crazy. Like they were just like, this doesn't fit with the series. And I think that what changed, I think, is that like 10 10 hit, and it was just like after 10 it didn't really seem like there was any undoing what happened as far as that was concerned, and that that cemented the role of love and romance in the Final Fantasy storyline in a way that there was just no really going back from it. And I think that this is one of the most unforgivable sins of 15, you know and one of the biggest crux and axes that I have to grind with it as a storyline is just that Luna Freya like shows up and then is like instantaneously killed, and it's like, that is the if that wasn't the jumping of the shark moment. Another thing that happened, I think, is that after 10, I became aware of the fact that I had started to nurture a growing addiction to romance, although content related to romance. But I guess one of the differences between me and the opposite sex was a pretty strong preference for it, coming at me through the direction of anime rather than books, and also manga. I'm willing to take it in that form. But what killed me is just that so many women grew up on like romance books, and it's like the last couple of years we've seen like Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey, which have both just awful uniquely. They both commit a completely unforgivable sin, unlike Final Fantasy 15, in that they glorify an abusive relationship. And for all of 15's faults, and for all of the giant glowing pile of shit that it is as a game, it didn't do that. Kudos for that much. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that has got me about the Japanese sense of romance is just that, and had gripped me in a way that it hadn't with a lot of these North American fiction, was just, if you look at like Rumbling Hearts as an anime, or at least its North American title, but I still tend to refer to it as KGNE or Kimigano Zumuin. I tend to prefer the Japanese version of it anyways. The North American launch was botched in a lot of ways. But it wasn't just that. It was just that, it didn't find as much of a receptive audience here on this side of the Atlantic, or the Pacific, I mean, that it really should have. So I just, I felt that a lot of the people in this country just got it wrong, very wrong. I mean, they just didn't understand it, like, Dealer Truth didn't get it. A lot of the channels here on YouTube that covered it just didn't fucking understand this one. It hit them the wrong way, and they never really fucking understood it the way that it was meant to. And it just felt like, maybe these people just aren't really part of the target demographic of the series, and they have stumbled upon it despite this fact, and they don't like what they're seeing because it was never meant for them in the first place. And that's the conclusion I came to when it came to Rumbling Hearts as a series. But I became cognizant of the fact that I loved drama, and I had a preference for that over comedy a lot of the time, as far as television shows go. But I also became cognizant of this love of romance, and I'm not preferential to rom-coms, but they're acceptable. Although there may be something of a preference towards animes that or at least show romances that tend to be very lean in the drama direction. But maybe there is some like comedic sprinkling when things get too heavy, with them. And Rumbling Hearts, hits me in right that space. Like very heavy, but in some of the worst parts, there's enough comedic relief to keep it from weighing too much, to keep carrying the show, after that point, and that's what I fell in love with it about, because it was just like, contrast this to other romances, and I can't seem to find anything that isn't, a rom com. I I've yet to see anything that really matches it in terms of being a rom drama. I really, really have not been able to replace that particular experience. Everything else has been a rom com. So, at its core, and KG&E was a rom drama that has light sprinklings of comedic relief. That was refreshing, but I became aware of the fact that I very much so love shipping and love romance, and the relationships between characters and everything in these storylines, and it got me that Final Fantasy had become completely dependent on romance, and you can't do it without a boy girl romance as part of the story. It's not fit for purpose if it doesn't have one, and they tried to have one in this one. They really did in 15, but they didn't actually execute on it. They just had her killed like pretty much instantly, and it's just, that's like, I think that is one of the biggest axes that I have to grind with it. Everybody's like, "Oh, its ending was abrupt," and I'm like, "Dude, like, the ending was abrupt. I mean, this giant flaming pile of shit was never good in the first place. Like, it's been bad. It jumped the shark like way before the end got rushed and cobbled together. I mean, it jumped the shark when Luna Freya got killed within 5 fucking seconds of meeting her. I mean, this is a shit game. I hated it. I got through it, and disappointment doesn't even begin to describe the experience that I had watching the Let's Play. It was like, oh my god, that's all there fucking is to it, and people bought this shit. It did as well as it did sales wise. I mean, this game is shit. Like, like, that shit stinks, man. Whoa. And I know that I'm laughing about it now and everything, but I mean, it was a gigantic flaming pile of shit, and it really kind of it really kind of blew my mind the way that so many other like Square Enix fans just like they twisted themselves into contortions because they didn't want to believe that SE would throw this gigantic, pile of shit at us, and that it spent 10 years in development hell. And the story of this damn game, and how it ends up taking 10 years to hit us anyways, ends up being quite the compelling and interesting story, but it's turned me into a versus 13 truther. I didn't intend to be this. I know that after I walked away from this giant flaming pile of shit, I found myself wondering, how the hell did this game crumble into the absolute, like, just dog shit state that it became, that just utterly ruined it, where there was just nothing redeemable about it, and it was just entirely a mountain of shit that ends up being a sausage fest that tries to very hard to be something that's actually compelling or worth watching, and it just it really didn't fit after they were done with it, and that's why I've become sort of defensive of Nomura as a director in this whole thing. Although these projects are really ultimately the brainchild of way more than just one person, but scrapping the Versus 13 story in favor of 15 was just, how should I put it, a catastrophe in the product that we ended up getting. I mean, I know that it did very well on launch, and that's because there was a ton of excitement, and it kind of shaped what we experienced with 16, in that nobody like there were pre-order sales just plummeted. Final Fantasy, as far as everybody was concerned, had not been relevant for like a decade. You you see a lot of people bashing it on the internet at this point. I've never seen this level of criticism when it comes to the game before. I've never seen this many people that were dissatisfied with Final Fantasy as a project as I've been seeing lately. The dissidents have finally kind of come out of the woodwork and started to be vocal about things, and I myself am now finally vocal about my own experience of this. Now, I don't know. I mean, when I look back on it, I look back on like the PlayStation 3 era of gaming, and I look at the gulf between like between the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation 4, and that era, I mean, I think that I may have kind of engaged in gaming, but at that point I had kind of gone back over to the Nintendo camp, and bought the Nintendo DS. I never got my hands on a 3DS though, but I had used that to play like the Final Fantasy IV remake and everything. But I kind of was going through like a period where I was just kind of disengaged from gaming altogether. I mean, like, I think maybe part of it was just growing and aging and just disinterested in, gaming as a, and everything that was coming out at the time, and feeling like there just was a dearth of, well, not a dearth, I mean, there just wasn't, it was a black hole where there just wasn't anything being launched that I was necessarily all that interested in, during that period, or at least I hadn't looked up the RPG space in so long that it just, I wasn't aware that there was anything coming out that really excited me, and so I was just playing a lot of the remakes and some of the newer like Final Fantasy IV related content at the time. But I never actually got engaged enough to the point where like I went out and bought a PlayStation 3. I didn't re-engage in even having one until the PlayStation 4, and then I like almost barely even played the 4. And then I've got my 5 sitting out there and everything, and I look back at this period though, and it kind of feels like I kind of became completely disengaged from gaming for a while, and went in a completely different direction, and more became engaged in like watching anime and everything else, and completely disconnected from the gaming community at that point. So like this awareness of what that era was like on like the PlayStation is kind of missing. I don't know, really. I was not, I really just wasn't part of the whole experience for that period. I don't know what it was, but I just didn't. I kind of felt like it was a lull where I just wasn't interested in gaming at all. You know, and if I was just so marginally attached. It was like maybe a couple of games on the DS, and that was it. That was all I really did. And then when I was done with them, I just put them down and never really picked them up again. The fucking DS that I had up again at that point. It was just I was done, and it was over basically. And that was kind of my experience of the Nintendo DS and that whole period. And I remember like people were going absolutely apeshit about like the Wii, trying to get their hands on one, and I remember just kind of rolling my eyes at a lot of the new features of the Wii, like the swing a rack and everything. And I was just like, this all this shit is like so lame, but I guess there are people that are into it. More power to them. But it's not for me, so to speak. I was having that kind of experience with it, and with 15, I just I hated it. Like if I'm gonna speak for myself, I didn't find that there was really anything that could have saved this after they were done with it. And you know Nomura has his fair share of critics, especially because like they will look at the guys that trained Nomura, on Final Fantasy VII, and the way that he acts like Final Fantasy VII is his brainchild, when in reality, the older developers that were forced into retirement were, had their hands all over Seven as well. The senior behind Seven, and they're very critical of Nomura, and he's a very divisive figure within the company, where people have polarized opinions in both directions at this point. But what I will tell you is that if they had taken Nomura's direction on Final and Versus, the game would not be the giant glowing pile of shit that it is. it would have actually been decent.